You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 10th of October 2024 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio 1 here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. Coming up on today's programme.
But I urge everyone in Hurricane Milton's path to follow all safety instructions as we head to the next 24 hours. It's literally a matter of life and death.
Is Hurricane Milton an exception or the new rule? Also ahead, the US Supreme Court settles into its current session. Later in the show, we'll find out why Finns are less and less keen on creating more Finns and what might be done about it. We'll wrap up the latest from the retail sector. And come on, he's just back from holiday. He's really excited about it. It's like 5 minutes out of your day. Just grit your teeth and get through it. I've read that out loud again, haven't I?
Yes, indeed, Andrew. Today, prepare yourself. I'll give you a lesson on Turkish pop.
I cannot wait. That is all coming up right here on The Briefing on Monocle Radio. And welcome to today's edition of The Briefing with me, Andrew Muller. The sun is coming up across Florida round about now, which means the scale of the damage wrought by Hurricane Milton will be becoming apparent. At least 3 million homes and businesses across the state are known to be without power, and the cities of St. Petersburg and Tampa reported astonishing quantities of rain, nearly half a metre in a matter of hours. Milton has now headed out over the Atlantic Ocean, but Florida remains at severe risk of flooding, storm surges and tornadoes. Well, I'm joined now by Andrew Freedman, senior climate reporter at Axios. Andrew, Milton was Category 3. It had come down a couple of notches by the time it made landfall, and it was Category 1 when it exited the other side of Florida. But even so, was it notably different to previous hurricanes?
Yes, thank you for having me. It has been. So first of all, because it was so strong on its approach, including on Wednesday morning, it was still a Category 5. It kind of carried the surge of a stronger storm, so it piled more water onto the coast. It also came in off of record warm ocean temperatures, which added more moisture to the storm, which allowed it to dump rainfall of up to 18 inches in just a few hours, especially in the Tampa, St. Petersburg area. And then it expanded in size with time. So its winds touched much of the Florida peninsula, and now that it's exiting the coast, it's still buffeting eastern Florida with hurricane force winds. That's why you're seeing such a large amount of power outages.
You mentioned there warmer oceans as a factor, and of course those oceans are not likely to get cooler anytime soon. If that is the case, does Florida, and I guess the area around the Gulf of Mexico generally, have to get used to more storms of this magnitude?
You know, the Gulf Coast has seen 10 major hurricanes just since 2017. That's Category 3 or higher. Part of that is due to climate change. When you think about climate change intensifying some of these storms and allowing them to intensify more rapidly, Florida and other Gulf Coast states and other hurricane-prone states in the United States up and down the East Coast need to get ready and be prepared for storms that are a little bit more fickle, that are able to intensify at the drop of a hat. We're getting better at predicting that, but it is still not perfect. This storm's forecast for the storm track days in advance was on target. However, we need to get used to storms that carry tremendous amounts of water, in part because of climate change, because that adds more water vapor to the atmosphere that these storms can wring out. So the short answer to you is yes, we have to get used to some more powerful storms, potentially hitting more frequently, but the frequency of storms may not go up a tremendous amount. It's more that the intensity and the effects of these storms are being accentuated.
What kind of preparations can be made for events of this magnitude, though? Is it all about adjusting building codes so new buildings are more resistant to events like this?
Well, to some extent it is. I mean, Florida's building codes were revised in the wake of Hurricane Andrew in 1992. So if you look at homes, even in the wake of Hurricane Ian a couple of years ago, most homes, especially newly built homes, withstood the wind damage quite well, even though the winds were above 100 miles an hour. That is an example of successful building codes. However, that didn't help with the storm surge near the coast. And that's why the saying, at least in the US, is you need to flee from the water and hide from the wind. So we say, inland residents hunker down and shelter in place for the wind. And if you're along the coast and you were told to evacuate, please listen to authorities. So I think building codes are a big part of it. Trying to do some reforms in the insurance market is another part of it. There's a number of other storm adaptations that can be made, but there's also a limit to how we can get ready for these storms. And in particular, there's groups of people who are not able to get out, who don't have the means, who are more vulnerable. We're talking, a lot of residents in areas of towns that may not be the wealthiest areas that you happen to see. Those people are riding it out because they aren't able to go and stay for 5 days or so in a hotel well inland or well north of their home.
And in terms of marshalling a coherent response by both government and citizens, it is obviously important in a situation like this that they work together. How helpful or otherwise is it that you have voices on the conservative side of American politics, up to and including one actual congresswoman insisting that the government has caused this deliberately?
This is a new... a new phenomenon. Some people are arguing that this is an outgrowth of climate denial in the U.S., that this is another step in that direction. There are other people who are just absolutely looking at this as complete and utter falsehoods. The extent to which the misinformation, however, is interfering with abilities to prepare and respond is at an extent to which, like FEMA, for example, which is the agency that responds to these events and aids people who need to pick up the pieces, the day before the storm, they had to hold a press conference and basically bat down rumors, some to this effect, some to the effect of where their resources were. Some were rumors about how they weren't responding to people in North Carolina after Helene. It's to a greater extent and severity than we have seen in the United States before. And the leaders of FEMA and other agencies are really having a hard time cutting through it. And I would argue that it speaks to the media landscape in the United States right now and the removal of safeguards on different social networks that used to try to combat misinformation. And right now it's kind of a free-for-all on X and on other platforms.
Andrew Freedman, Senior Climate Reporter with Axios, thank you for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing. Here is Laura Kramer with today's other headlines.
Thanks, Andrew. Taiwan's president says he will resist any attempt to take over the island or claim its territory. China considers Taiwan its own and hasn't ruled out using force to achieve unification. At least 5 health workers and 2 Hezbollah leaders have been killed in Israeli airstrikes in Lebanon today. Israel's Air Force also hit targets in Syria, damaging a car factory and a military site. And Somalia's president is visiting Eritrea today amid rising tensions in the Horn of Africa, especially between Somalia and Ethiopia. Egypt's president, who supports Somalia in its conflict with Ethiopia, is also expected to visit Eritrea soon. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Laura. This is the briefing on Monocle Radio, and depending on how things are shaking out around a month from now, the US Supreme Court is a body about which we might shortly be hearing a great deal more. Nevertheless, the court's normal work is continuing with a lengthy and diverse docket up for consideration as its current term gets properly underway. A short while ago, I spoke to Jamie Floyd, New York-based journalist, attorney and former White House fellow. I began by asking if any of the cases before the court may have some bearing on the upcoming presidential election.
Well, it certainly may. As of now, it does not, but the docket changes over the course of the term. And as we've seen in the last several years, over the course of the Trump years and thereafter, the court is asked to weigh in on matters related to elections and electioneering. So I would not be surprised if the court is asked to address some voting matters related to the presidential election. So we're all waiting to see. But there's nothing currently, Andrew, on the docket related to the election.
So on the docket as it stands, the things we know that they will be deliberating about, what especially leaps out at you?
Well, the most controversial case, they've already heard a couple of cases. They start by congressional edict on the first Monday of every October. And that's been the case since 1917. I don't know why Congress cares, but that's the rule. So they've already started hearing cases. But the case that's most controversial here is a case involving transgender youth. The case is called U.S. v. Squirmetti. And it focuses on a Tennessee law, but the law is representative of laws in 23 states that ban some form of medical treatment. They vary from state to state for transgender minors. And in this particular case, just to put, lawyers love to talk in legal terms, but I always try and put a human face on the cases. In this case in Tennessee, we're talking about Samantha and Brian Williams. They live in Nashville, Tennessee, a very famous place in this country. And they have a 15-year-old transgender daughter. So we're talking about a 15-year-old child. And then their other representative plaintiffs are 18 years old and under. So for purposes of this case, we're talking about people who are 18 years old and under. And the lawsuit alleges or claims that there are 3,000 transgender adolescents in the state of Tennessee that would be impacted if this legislation is permitted to stand. And then, of course, as I said, there are 23 other states that have similar laws. So this is why the Supreme Court has taken the case. It's not just one child. It's not just one state. It's a matter of national import. And here in the U.S., this is a major topic of conversation over the last, I'd say, decade.
I mean, it's a question that could be applied to several of the cases I know they're contemplating, but this particular issue has become such a thing in America's interminable culture war. Is there any prospect at all that the court doesn't just vote along partisan lines as we've seen it do so often in recent years?
Well, I actually think the court may surprise people because this does kind of dive down into very esoteric legalese. But we have this thing in the U.S. about protected classes. So race is a protected class. Gender is a semi-protected class. Age is a semi-protected class. This goes back to the Civil War and enslavement. And so race is the most strictly protected class. And so the question for the court is going to be whether or not transgender youth fall into this class or not. And without getting too much into the weeds, I don't think the states are going to be able to demonstrate, Tennessee is going to be able to demonstrate that their laws are necessary in the way that the court requires, and the court may strike down the laws. Enough of the justices may feel, of course, we have the liberal justices, they're going to strike down those laws. But I think there may be one or two of the quote unquote conservative justices who say we've got to strike this down because there's this class of people. What you're doing with this law, they're protected enough that you can't do this with this class of people. I think people may be surprised because it won't be about the culture wars for the court. It will be about what is allowed under the U.S. Constitution.
There's also going to be another attempt, as I understand it, and various legal endeavours of this sort have been launched before, of trying to make gun manufacturers in some way responsible for what is done with their products.
The ghost guns, because we have another fascinating case where the country of Mexico is suing manufacturers in the U.S. So we could talk about that if you'd like as well. But the ghost gun case is fascinating. So this allows you to purchase just what you need as an individual to make your own little gun at home. And we have this history in the United States, this Second Amendment, where people are very wedded to the notion of their right to bear arms, is what we call it. And I won't dive into whether or not I think the Second Amendment gives the individual the right to pack a sidearm. The U.S. Supreme Court has said, yes, it does. The real question is whether or not the state can regulate the manufacturers who are selling the components to allow people to make guns in their home. That's the question. It's not whether or not you have the right to make the gun or carry the gun. It's whether or not manufacturers can be regulated. And again, I think the court may surprise us because this conservative court has been very pro-Second Amendment, allowing people pretty much to pack and carry, as we say here in the U.S. But I don't know that they're going to allow or to say that the state has no ability to regulate manufacturers who are just providing without any. The problem here, Andrew, is there's no traceability for these ghost guns. So if I'm Smith & Wesson or Colt and I make a gun and I sell it to you, that has all kinds of markings on it, registration numbers, serial numbers. So law enforcement can trace that gun if a crime is committed. But with these guns that I make at home, there's no traceability because it hasn't been made by a manufacturer. And I just don't think the Supreme Court's going for that. As conservative as they are, as Second Amendment rooted as some of the justices are, it's, I think, a bridge too far. So that's what the ghost guns case is all about.
That was Jamie Floyd, the New York-based journalist, attorney and former White House fellow. You are listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You are back with The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Finland is not a big country population-wise, just over 5.5 million people. Finland is on track, however, to become an even smaller one. On current trends, by the turn of the 22nd century, there will be just 4.5 million Finns. Finland is hardly alone in the developed world in facing this kind of demographic doom spiral, but it is taking steps to address it. Today, Finland's Ministry of Health and Social Welfare publishes a new report contemplating the problem and some possible solutions. I'm joined now by the author of that report, Anna Rotkoch, Director at Population Research Institute Vestolito. Anna, first of all, as I understand it at least, the Finnish birth rate was actually rising as recently as 20 years ago. What changed?
Well, yes, that's a very good question. In the beginning of this century, not only Finland, but the Nordics in general had quite a decent increase in birth rates. And we were between 1.8, even close to 2 in Iceland. And we were seen worldwide as, the leaders in kind of how to solve this, how to have maybe not replacement rate, but quite high fertility and also, good levels of gender equality and child well-being. But then something changed then, since in the last 14 years, our birth rates have collapsed, as you said.
Have you been able to pin down what has brought that about? Because that does seem to suggest a huge shift inside a generation there.
Yes, and not even a generation, like 12 years. So something clearly happened in 2008 because so many trends go down in the 2010s. We don't know enough, but everything points to the things that it's related to a broader cultural change in lifestyle goals, in when, at which age people even start trying to have children, which is generally too late, and also in partnerships.
I mean, It's not peculiar to Finland, of course. This is a trend across the developed world. But did you encounter reasons that are specific to Finland, or is it part of that global trend?
I think everything points to this being a global trend, as you said. Finland and maybe the Nordics in general appear to have been more vulnerable than most. This may be due to our quite high degrees of individualization, also technology and social media use. But basically we see now the very same trends in other countries, like throughout entire Europe. And I think it's really important to understand that what the Nordics seem to have done right in the early part of the century, the Nordic family policy model, with, good paternal leaves and maternal leaves, childcare allowances, early childhood education. This is still really important to help people have a second and a third and a fourth child. But the challenge today is more about how to also enable people to have the first child when they say they do want to become parents.
Well, let's talk about a few possible solutions then. I mean, you allude there to those very family-friendly policies of Finland and the other Nordic states, which are often held up as a model elsewhere in the world. If they're not working the way that they used to, what else might?
Well, the thing is, they are working when parents of small children think about having a next child. But so we always need to stand on on two legs. Sorry, we need to stand on two legs. We do need to understand that they are really important, and those countries who have not implemented them, I think, should. They are also really important for well-being, but also they are proven to be important for fertility. But then the other challenge is enabling the whole pathway to family formation and having a first child. And here it's, for instance, really a question about understanding how reproductive biology works. And that if you want 2 or 3 children with quite a high level of certainty, you should start trying for pregnancy before you turn 30 years old.
I mean, is it finally then just a question of making that more financially viable? Because earlier you mentioned the year 2008, which was, of course, the year of a monstrous global financial crisis, one of the knock-on effects of which has been that housing has become increasingly difficult to afford in a lot of the developed world. And obviously that doesn't encourage people to have families if they've got nowhere to put them. Is the question fundamentally financial, do you think?
No. I actually think it's not. This is, of course, a big issue for many families. I do think we need to support families financially even more than we do now, also in the Nordics. But this is not the root of the problem. We know this now from a solid amount of demographic and sociological and economic research. Housing prices, unemployment levels, changes in income cannot explain this recent rapid acceleration of the fertility decline. It's also about values, about prioritizing parenthood, and it's really about partnerships too. We see this. It's one of the main reasons for childless people who want to have a child that they can't have it is that they lack a suitable partner.
Anna Rotkirch at Population Research Institute Västerlito, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. This is The Briefing on Monocle Radio. It's time now for a wrap-up of retail news. And joining me now is Rebecca Tay, the retail expert and brand consultant. Rebecca, first of all, not the first time that Saudis have gone shopping at Selfridges, but this time it's a bit different.
Yes, indeed. They are. They've taken an ownership stake this time. You're right. Very different indeed than just shopping at the department store.
I mean, what kind of difference will that make to Selfridges? Do we know?
It'll be interesting. I think, there's a history of this in the UK already. So Harvey Nichols is owned by a Qatari family. This is the Saudi Public Investment Group, or a Public Investment Fund, sorry. So they're taking a 40% stake. They are saying that it's to kind of increase awareness of the brand, to kind of help accelerate their growth. They are co-owning it, though. So how much power they'll actually have, I suppose we'll have to see. They're co-owning it with a Thai group as well. So that's quite an interesting combination. And they are taking over as well from an Austrian group. So there's a lot of different kind of countries' players at stake here. And again, they only have a 40% stake. So they don't actually have a majority stake. The Thai group that I mentioned have a 60%. So how they kind of the deals of the particulars of the deal haven't been disclosed, but how they'll actually kind of work out the balance of power and what they'll actually mean, I think we'll have to wait and see.
Changes as well at another well-known luxury mark. This at Gucci, there is a new CEO, though not really a new CEO. This is the sort of CEO in waiting being formally anointed.
Yes, exactly. So he's been the deputy chief executive. There was actually an interim chief executive, so a lot of chief executive titles being thrown around again. But his name is Stefano Cantino. He is a little bit more pedigreed, I would say. So he spent 20 years at Prada, and then he spent the last 5 or 6 years at Louis Vuitton. So definitely kind of well versed in the fashion business. And the interim CEO, Jean-Francois Palou, was sort of there to sort of just tied the passing of the designers, I suppose. He was a managing director at Kering, so the owner of Gucci, but he was sort of deemed to not really have the sort of hands-on knowledge of how to actually run a fashion business, which Stefano definitely has, having been at Prada and Louis Vuitton.
Well, now that he has the job, though, what are his immediate priorities going to be?
I think it will be definitely to turn around. So at Louis Vuitton in particular, he oversaw all of the brand image and communications. And image is definitely a problem that Gucci has at the moment. Ever since Sabato de Sarno came on, there's sort of been a lack of clear understanding of what Gucci actually stands for. They do have, they have over 100 years of history, but Alessandro Michele, who was the previous creative director, has such a clear vision and such a clear aesthetic that I think customers have sort of been kind of going, well, what is Sabato? What is his look? What are we looking at? What are we, is it kind of this sort of fun fashion that Alessandro was known for? Or what are we buying Gucci for these days? And so there's sort of this image problem. People don't really know what to look to Gucci for. So I think Stefano will be there to sort of help steer the ship. I think his experience in fashion also, presumably he'll be working very closely with the designer to sort of help steer it back on course, I would say.
And just finally, do you think, given that we now know what the theme of the Met Gala is going to be, that we will see much Gucci being worn?
I think so. It's an interesting theme. So the theme is, it's about Black dandyism. So it's specifically called Superfine, Tailoring Black Style. It is interesting because it's the first theme for the Met Gala in about 20 years to focus just on menswear. So the last 20 years they've been broader, but there's definitely been more of a focus on women's wear. Gucci, as we know, does women's wear and menswear. And it's an interesting time, I think, to focus on kind of flamboyant men's fashion, which is sort of the definition of dandyism, I suppose. So I think Gucci will play a part at the Met Gala next May for sure.
Rebecca Tay, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing. This is The Briefing with me, Andrew Muller. It's the last item on Thursday's show, which means that regular listeners have already thrown their radios into the nearest available pond. But those who've never listened to The Briefing on a Thursday before are about to be treated to the Global Countdown with Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Fernando, where are we going?
We are going to Turkey, but today, as every week, it's a special one.
It's always special.
It's always
Fernando.
special. Of course, the Quality of Life conference is happening right now in Istanbul.
Many of our colleagues literally are in Turkey.
In fact,
I'm sure they are all right now huddled round a radio, tuning in.
I hope they
Hi,
don't.
everyone.
I hope they don't test my Turkish. It's quite a challenging language, especially if you don't speak the language. But basically, Andrew, I'm basing my global countdown on a piece on Monocle this month by Hannah Lucinda Smith. So shout out to her because she gave me a lot of inspiration.
She'll be huddled round the radio with the rest of them right now.
So she looked at Turkish pop music and she even interviewed a big pop star, which I'm not going to mention the name right now.
Okay.
So it's not quite an order like the best song. It's kind of a chronological order of Turkish pop history.
Okay.
We're starting in the late 60s now. She is the diva in Turkey. Her name is Ayda Pekan, and she's 78, still performing stages this year. I think she was performing in June. Some people say that she's a Turkish Cher. I would say she could be even bigger than that, in a way. We're going to play one of her biggest hits, which is the Turkish version for I Will Survive. The name is called Bambaşka Biri by Ayda Pekan.
Yalnız kaldım, yıkılmadım, ayaktayım, yaşadım, yaşıyorum. Başım yukarıda meydan okuyorum, hayata ve sana. Gönlüm doluyor aşkla, barıştım bak hayatla, başladım, yaşamaya.
I mean, it's fabulous, undeniably.
I mean, the melody will, of course, be familiar to anybody who has ever drifted within earshot of a karaoke bar, but you're saying that's late 60s?
That's kind of, that song that we played is from the 70s. So
that's what I thought, because I would have placed the Gloria Gaynor hit at circa the mid-1970s.
You're very right. I mean,
you're not going to catch me out on Gloria Gaynor, Fernando.
1968 when she released her debut LP, but then I chose this track, which is one of her most famous songs.
I see.
As well.
I'm watching you, Fernando.
Please do.
You're not going to get anything by me today. What do we have next? Which epoch are we now descending upon?
We're going kind of to the late 70s, early 80s. And my first question is, are you a big fan of Anatolian psychedelic rock?
It's not, if I'm honest with you, Fernando, an issue I've ever given a great deal of thought until this very moment.
Perhaps you should, because it's very influential right now. Even new artists in Turkey, they are using lots of that sound. And I think one of the most important kind of singers in this kind of scene of Anatolian rock, which all started in the 60s. But this song we're going to play is from 1973. It's by a singer called Baris Manso. The song's called Hey Koça Topsa. Let's have a listen and then we'll talk more about the song.
I mean, this sounds like somebody trying to bring traditional Turkish influences to bear on something like Jefferson Airplane. And obviously anything you brought to bear on Jefferson Airplane could by definition only improve it.
Exactly. But I generally think they had a very strong scene, very distinctive. Of course, there's been some influences, from the Western world, for absolutely no doubt. But this scene, as I said, we have a band called Altingan. They're a Turkish band. They're doing very well today, not only in Turkey, but outside Turkey as well. And clearly you see the influence of an artist like Baris Manso. And he also, in 1973, he already started doing video clips before MTV even started. So he was kind of an original in that sense as well.
And doubtless in many others. What do we have next?
Now we're going to the 90s. This song was big. I remember as a child in Brazil, I've listened to this. It was genuinely a worldwide hit. And he's still big today. It's, of course, Tarkan with Sumarik, which means spoiled. I'm sure you're going to recognize this track, Andrew. Let's have a listen.
That was, of course, later a hit for Neighbours alumnus turned Reform UK advocate Holly Valance.
Exactly.
I knew that without looking it up, which is a tragic waste of brain cells, really.
Well, and let's be honest, the original is much better.
Well, so are most things.
Exactly. But Tarkan, he's huge. I mean, and this song was all over Europe. In France, it was a big hit, and number one in Belgium as well. So I think he showed that Turkey could also not just this Anatolian rock vibes, but could have a very catchy pop tune. I'm a big fan of Tarkan as well, and that kiss kiss at the end, it's quite cute as well.
At number 2.
Well, at number 2 we have, I mean, of course I have to mention this. Turkey, I'm missing you so much on Eurovision. What a shame. They stopped performing at the event in 2013 because they disagreed with the voting system. But they had a very amazing history.
What was their disagreement with the voting system? Did they disagree with the fact that nobody ever voted for them?
Exactly, but what a shame. I mean, but let's be honest, Turkey actually was okay. It was never like the worst on the list. I think
it was often pretty dreadful.
No, really. Not this song that we're going to play right now. The winning song from the 2003 Eurovision Song Contest by the national icon, may I say, Sertab Erener with Every Way That I Can.
Come on now, I want to show you all again what it would be like. Just let go and let me love you every way that I can. I'm trying to make you love me again. Every way that I can. I'll give you all my love affair. Every way that I can. I'll die.
That won Eurovision.
They won, and it's known among Eurovision fans as one of the best winning songs of all time.
Is it?
It is true. And
this is a bit of a one-eyed man in Kingdom of Blind scenario.
But Andrew, not only that, it's a celebration of Turkey-European Union relations, which at that time, it was a sign of positivity.
Do you think that song may be the reason that Turkey's accession to the EU has stalled?
No.
Do you think the rest
Quite the opposite.
Do you think the rest of the EU heard that song at Eurovision and thought, God, what a din. If we let them in, there'll just be endless amounts more of that?
They were just jealous about the amazing Turkish pop scene. That's all I can say.
It's an interpretation. With what are we reaching a shuddering climax of this week's Global Countdown, Fernando?
Well, and you know what? I'm going to promote the October issue as well.
Why not?
Because we have an amazing profile of this Istanbul musician. Her name is Melik Sahin. She is amazing. And she's, besides being a modern pop diva, her lyrics are very much feminist. So a lot of Turkish women, they use her lyrics actually when they go and protest as well. So there is kind of a political component to her music. And it's amazing. She has a new album out. We're going to play one of the new singles by Melik Sahin is Ortak. Let's have a listen.
Mazur gör, merak bu, sadece soruyorum. Öyle kolay mı el gibi kaçmak? Mazeretin ne olsa da duysak. Söyle değer mi, değdi mi ortak? Dağ gibi
Controversially and unusually, Fernando, I didn't hate that. I think that's actually not bad at all. And listeners and indeed readers can find out more about her in the current issue, which is on a newsstand near them right now, yes?
Absolutely. And I think she represents this new modern Turkish pop music scene. And as I said, it's quite distinctive. I don't think, in the past we have Ida Pekan covering I Will Survive. But this time it's quite the opposite. Probably some Western artists will go to Turkey and be inspired.
Fernando Augusto Pacheco, Monocle's senior correspondent, thank you for joining us. That is all for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Anita Riota. Our researcher was Gunnar Grunlid and also George Ruskin, and our studio manager was Flynn Simons. The Briefing returns tomorrow at the same time, midday London. I'm Andrew Muller. Thanks for listening.